So, welcome. I'm starting a little bit early, maybe like 15 minutes-ish early, because like I said last time, which was what, Saturday? I feel like I've been starting late, and it would be appropriate if I just started a little bit earlier. So, welcome, welcome. Hello, Wither. We got both Twitch and TikTok live like usual on Thursdays and Saturdays. Thursdays, for anyone that's never been here, I'm Dr. Bird, and on Thursdays we read. There will also be occasional critique, depending on what becomes appropriate to say. Today we're going to do a little different. So somebody suggested that I read an article about, let's see, let's pull it up, shall we? Where? So we're going to read an article, and then we're going to read a book. At least a part of the book, of course. We're not gonna read the whole book. Where is my Adobe? Oh yes, here we go. All right, so I probably gotta pull it up so that, yeah, there we go. All right, so for anyone that's on TikTok, if you want to see like a better view of the chat, you're gonna be able to go over to the Twitch that's linked in my bio. Now that I think about it, my iPad, I forgot to grab that, and that's what I use to make sure I can read the Twitch chat. It's been kind of a strange day, if I'm being honest. So let me grab that real quick. And then we're going to start by reading this article that's by Glenn Couthard and Leanne Samasoke Simpson. And it's called Grounded Normativity, Place-Based Solidarity. And then what I was thinking we'd do afterwards is read a chapter or two from Susan Griffin's Women and Nature, The Roaring Inside Her. For anyone that's ever talked to me or seen me talk for more than like 30 seconds knows that I'm adamantly against cis heteronormativity. So this book was from, I think, the 70s? 1980. Oh, copyright 1978, though. So odds are good. There's going to be a lot of conflation of gender and sex, which we know isn't true. Twinkle! You're messing with the light. The light. So I'm already hella overstimulated by the light that's coming in right here after the day that I've had. Um, so I gotta make sure I close that. You're cute, but you're getting in the way. So that's the plan. But let me go grab the iPad, like I said, so I can see the Twitch chat, and I'll see if there's anything I can do about the light situation, and we'll be right back. So I always forget to do this. But right now, I'm gonna set this here. Shouldn't take me any more than a couple minutes. So BRB. Get a little nice little drink or something. And that's what we'll All right. So that took a little longer than I realized because right when I was explaining that, I have this habit still. Anyone that's already read the first part of my memoir knows I've like used to bite my nails hardcore and my cuticles. And I still pick at them, and I didn't realize, but apparently I picked and it went a little bit too far, and so I had to bandage it up. But we're back. We're ready to read about grounded normativity and place-based solidarity. So let's get into it. So like I said just a moment ago, we're going to read Couthard and Simpson's Grounded Normativity, Place-Based Solidarity. Came out in 2016. And then I'm going to read a chapter or two from Susan Griffin's Women in Nature, which came out in like the late 70s. I think that this article from 2016 is going to give us a good entrance into understanding the way that Griffin probably talked about it. Oh, really? Oh, no. You're like a tumbleweed. I'm glad. Hopefully that means you weren't, though. All right, let's get into it. I don't know how many pages. It looks like it's super short. It's like 8 pages long. So let's get into it. It goes like this. Anyone on Twitch can see it, but for anyone that doesn't remember as well, I have captions that exist on Twitch as well. And it can, either for necessity and accommodation or for preference, take advantage of that if you might enjoy it. But let's get into it. TikTok, you're not going to be able to see if I read it because there's only so much space. And I gotta situate this kind of strangely now that I notice it. Because obviously on Twitch, like it captures potentially a lot more of the screen, but with a page like this, it doesn't work the way that I would ideally like it to. Anyway, it goes like this. We would like to begin our response to David Roediger's provocative meditation on the historical and contemporary antinomies of solidarity in both theory and practice with a statement of gratitude to and political acknowledgement of the hosts of the 2015 annual meeting of the American Studies Association, ASA, held in Toronto last year, the nation of the Mississauga Nishnabeg. And by the way, I may butcher names, so if anyone knows and notices that I do, please let me know, okay? Toronto is an area rich in the theory and practice of Indigenous political alliance, holding the histories and presence of not only the Mississauga Nishnabeg, but also the Wendat and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. These nations negotiated and continued to practice diplomatic relationships with each other to share land while respecting each other's governance, jurisdiction, and sovereignty. Each nation also exists in deep reciprocal, I thought it was going to be the other word, relationships with the Great Lakes, in particular Lake Ontario and the waterways that flow into it. These nations foster deep relations to St. Lawrence River leading to the Atlantic Ocean, the diverse plant and animal nations within their territories, the thunders and rains, and all the physical and spiritual forces that connect them to this place, their creation, or their place of creation, in an intimate and meaningful way. To many of the Indigenous academics in attendance at the ASA, ourselves included, it probably came as little surprise to learn that the Mississauga, Nishnabeg, Wendat, and Haudenosaunee were not the hosts noted in the event's call for papers and proposals on the conference website or in much of the ASA's promotional materials, nor were the bulk of us likely surprised that neither their lands nor sovereignties figured much in the conference proceedings beyond symbolic opening gestures. Isn't that always the case? This form of erasure, that is, the erasure of Indigenous land and jurisdiction, is one of the miseries that constitute Indigenous peoples' experience of our settler colonial present, both inside and outside the Academy. The erasure of Mississauga, Nishnabeg, Wendat, and Haudenosaunee sovereignty from the ASA conference is not only a reinforcement of our settler colonial present, it is a negation of the contributions of their presence in this place, a presence that has been violently attacked in the name of dispossession for 4 centuries. It is a negation of their intellectual and political practices of governance and solidarity that we ignore at our peril. This acknowledgement, then, necessitates a different beginning, one in which we actively take on the contestation of settler colonialization in all its violent dimensions as a point of departure, so that when we present our work on solidarity against the misery of, we are not standing on the backs of indigenous peoples, but instead engaged as related comrades joined in critical co-resistance against the convergence of forces that divide and conquer us and the earth on which we depend. It seems appropriate, then, to recenter these issues, indigenous land and jurisdiction, in our response to Roediger's keynote address, and in doing so share some of our reflections on why these issues occupy such an ambivalent, if not contentious, place in the politics of solidarity in settler colonial contexts. Being the masterful historian that he is, Roediger's keynote, as well as its written incarnation published here, presents his audience with an uneasy and uneven history of subaltern solidarity across multiple axes of power and community. In doing so, he not only discloses a rich history of enacting transformative alliances within and across nation, race, and class, from Ferguson to Palestine, but also uses this history to stress the importance of us confronting, I don't know, I said that as if it was someone's last name, but that's obviously the place, which is Palestine. Sorry. It occurred to me after. I was like, Ferguson, not the place, some scholar's last name I'd never heard of. Okay, never mind. And I guess I said it like East Palestine in Ohio. So, okay, yeah, anyway. The difficulties and tensions that marked these past struggles in order to illuminate the ways in which they continue to shape our present. For our discussion here, one of the most telling historical examples drawn on by Roediger is his closing discussion of Bacon's Rebellion in 1676, which represents an early alliance temporarily forged across the formidable racial economic divide of white indentured and black slave labor, while perpetuating the structure of colonial dispossession. We would like to think that Roediger purposefully ended his intervention with a nod to the significance of indigenous dispossession and erasure because they, alongside anti-blackness and heteropatriarchy, inform the structure of capitalist accumulation and state power that has come to govern the reproduction of misery for so many of us today. What is it that makes solidarity such an elusive, if not difficult, phrase? Or practice. In academia, it's mostly just a phrase rather than a practice. So I guess that was a Freudian slip. Roediger's historical examination of the concept provides several core issues that still resonate today, including the difficulties in working with and across particular identity-related differences, working across geographic separation and coerced segregation, and contending with structures of power that function to divide us both materially and ideologically. This, of course, raises crucial questions. In what ways can and do marginalized subjects and communities work across their micro-specificities to align more effectively against macro-structural barriers to freedom and self-determination? I'm, like, concerned that my finger is bleeding, but I think it's actually sweating. I'm, like, getting really distracted by it. I think that it's just sweating. Okay. What is the composition of these macro structures of exploitation and domination, and what sorts of ideological attachments do they produce to blur them from view and thus block our ability to work collectively against them? Are these structures reducible to capital, white supremacy, anti-blackness, heterosexual and cis-male dominance, and/or the violence of the state, or is it our collective unfreedom overdetermined by all of these at once and in complex ways? In my own work, I, Glenn, have examined similar issues in a manner that I hope foregrounds the settler colonial frame within which these diverse configurations of power converge to produce a host of violences, from environmental degradation to white supremacy to heteropatriarchal domination to class exploitation and inequality. I conceptualize settler colonialism as a structure of domination that is partly predicted on the ongoing dispossession of indigenous peoples' lands and the forms of political authority and jurisdiction that govern our relationships to these lands. In doing so, I draw significantly from two theoretical resources, Karl Marx's writings on the primitive accumulation of capital and Frantz Fanon's decolonial critique of G.F. I don't know why I can't say the letters. G.W.F. Hegel's master-slave parable when applied to colonial situations. With respect to Marx, I claim that chapters 26 to 33 of his first volume of Capital are crucial because it is there that Marx most thoroughly weds capital to colonialism by way of his theory of primitive accumulation. Oh, hello! It's good to see you. Yes, this is the person that recommended it to me. By the way, I haven't asked you how you would like me to refer to you, so I just said, someone recommended this. But thank you for being here. However, as insightful as Marx's primitive accumulation thesis is, I argued that several issues must be addressed within his work to make his writings on colonialism relevant to analyzing the relationship between indigenous peoples and liberal settler states, in our case Canada, but the United States would fit here too. First, I argued that Marx's thesis on primitive accumulation must be stripped of its rigidly temporal characteristic. That is, rather than posit primitive accumulation as some historical situated event that sets the stage for the development of the capitalist mode of production, we should see it as an ongoing practice of dispossession that never ceases to structure capitalist and colonial social relations in the present. Second, I argued that Marx's theory of primitive accumulation must be stripped of its early normative developmentalism. In other words, while it is appropriate to view primitive accumulation as the condition of possibility for the development and ongoing reproduction of capitalism, it is not so to posit it as a necessary condition for developing the forms of critical consciousness and associated modes of life that ought to inform the construction of its alternatives. I also suggested, as does Roediger himself, that Marx came to see the problematic character of this early teleological formulation of his thesis and worked to correct it in the last decade of his life, as exemplified in his correspondence with populist Russian defenders of the Obshchina, or peasant village communes, such as Vera Zazuluch and N.K. Mikhailovsky. Now one might ask, why start with Marx given the significance of these obstacles? I was thinking that. Why not jump straight into Fanon's contribution, whose socio-diagnostic of the intersections of race, class, and colonization have already ensued much of these problems? Or better yet, why not just jump straight into indigenous people's thoughts on these matters, given that this is the diverse community from which we think and speak? Another thing I was yeah. Part of the answer to this question is similar to what animates Roediger's insistence on both learning from past theoretical traditions and movements while challenging the ways in which these traditions can stubbornly foreclose the possibility of forging radical solidarities in the present. In the case of Marxism, while it may provide the most internally diverse and robust critique of capitalist exploitation, we are less convinced that the tactics and strategies it has relied, or historically relied on, to move us beyond the violent mess we've inherited has entirely stripped itself of the falsely universalizing, or yeah, it absolutely hasn't, urban white heterosexualist, or no, okay, never mind, it's split, but heterosexist, masculinist, class reductionist, and state-centric character that informs a significant amount of Marx's own work and dominant Western articulations of Marxism. This is why I love, like, Black feminists, Marxists in particular, because they did an infinitely better job of not being exactly that in the way that Marx was, unfortunately. In the context of Indigenous peoples' struggles in Canada and elsewhere, this has historically resulted in not only a very shallow solidarity with respect to Indigenous claims and struggles, when it can even be said to exist, but more often than not, a call on Indigenous peoples to forcefully align their interests and identities in ways that contribute to our own dispossession and erasure. For self-proclaimed historical materialists, critics Francis Widdowson and Albert Howard, to employ a particularly belligerent yet contemporary example, the core problem with Indigenous peoples' claims is that insofar as they encourage the native population to identify in terms of ethnicity instead of socioeconomic class, they must be discarded as inherently divisive and reactionary. Wow! The authors then go on to tritely conclude that it is only by eliminating this fundamental difference, namely class difference, that we can become a global tribe and the world can live as one. That is such an academic thing to do. I just absolutely hate it here. Yeah, exactly, yeah. And I've been saying that in different ways, not as much, as to be expected, right? Like, much like how there's a reason why it took me so long to read anything about disability justice. Like, I only started reading anything about Indigenous justice probably a year or two before that, for the same reason that obviously Marx didn't even think to include it at all. Yeah, it's just so common. For indigenous, or wait, yeah, okay. For indigenous nations, this requires that we abandon our parochial, indeed Neolithic, attachments to land, language, and culture in exchange for our integration into the simultaneously disciplining yet enlightening fold of the modern proletariat. In no way do we intend to hold up Widdowson and Howard's slobbery, I love that, slobbery analysis as representative of the contemporary left, capital L, position on Indigenous self-determination efforts in Canada. I twinkle. What we ignore to our detriment, however, are the incredibly resistant normative assumptions that underwrite it. At least two of these assumptions stick out in our minds. First, it adheres to a modernist view of history and historical progress, informed by Eurocentric developmentalist ontology that historically ranks variation in human cultural forms and modes of production, according to each form's approximation to the full development of the human good. This is what I'm always having to try to explain to media ecologists that are like speaking from a traditional sense, because they never see like exactly how this has worked. And if you learn anything about critical cultural studies, like that's one of the it relates to everything that you can understand. So if you don't know that, like you end up falling into the same kind of fucking like just trap. And second, it treats the locatedness of land, culture, and place as material and ideational impediments to the formation of broader coalitions, and in turn posits them as factors that need to be abandoned for the sake of our own emancipation. Again, these are not assumptions associated strictly with white supremacist apologists. They are foundational to what Walter Mignolo and others have identified as a coloniality of modernity itself. Exactly. As such, they have long informed the dominant liberal and Marxist left's concern over what they claim to be the inherently parochial and particularist orientation of identity politics that is serving to undermine more egalitarian and universal aspirations, like those focused on class and directed towards a more equitable and non-exploitative distribution of socioeconomic goods. The concern with Indigenous claims to self-determination grounded in and informed by our attachments to land and sovereignty has also been raised recently among radical scholars and activists that one would intuitively assume might serve more organically as authentic comrades in co-resistance with Indigenous communities. In particular, we're thinking of the most recent critiques leveled at Indigenous studies in particular, and Indigenous social movements in general by Jared Sexton and Nandita Sharma. We believe that both Sexton and Sharma are committed anti-racists. Sharma's writings on the implication of capitalism and the state form in the perpetual displacement of and violence perpetrated against migrants is crucial, and we again ignore them at our peril. The same goes for Sexton's vitally important interventions, highlighting the specificity of anti-Blackness and its relationship to state formation and capitalist accumulation in North America and elsewhere, in the past and the present. Following this, it would be impossible for them to uphold the racist teleology that informs the arguments of so-called historical materialists like Widdowson and Howard. However, that being said, both advance lines of argument that are perhaps unwittingly but nonetheless infected with their own brand of anti-Native sentiment insofar as they demand that Indigenous peoples separate their justice claims from the supposedly anti-migrant and anti-Black character of our community or commitments to the land and jurisdictions that inform our identities as well as ethnic relationships with others. Our concern is that this misrepresentation of Indigenous studies and activism does an unwarranted disservice to the decades of solidarity work that those scholars and activists before us have labored so hard to establish within and between our respective communities inside and outside the academy. As a settler colonial power, Canada has structured its relationship to Indigenous peoples primarily through the dispossession of Indigenous bodies from Indigenous lands, and by impeding and systemically regulating the generative relationships and practices that create and maintain Indigenous nationhoods, political practices, sovereignties, and solidarities. The state-sanctioned murdering, assimilating, and disappearing of Indigenous bodies, asymmetrically distributed across genders, are, as the Mohawk scholar Audra Simpson says, a direct attack on Indigenous political orders because these bodies generate knowledge, political systems, and ways of being that contest the hegemony of settler governmentality and thus make dispossession all the more difficult to achieve.
attacking the relationality of indigenous political orders through the strategic targeting of indigenous peoples' relationship to land has been a site of intense white supremacy and heteropatriarchy, serving as a mechanism to submit indigenous lands and labor to the demands of capitalist accumulation and state formation. Historically, indigenous peoples have responded to this violence and negation through fierce and loving mobilization. Indigenous resistance and resurgence in response to the dispossessive forces of settler colonization, in both historical and current manifestations, employ measures and tactics designed to protect indigenous territories and to reconnect indigenous bodies to land through the practices and forms of knowledge that these practices continuously regenerate. What we are calling grounded normativity refers to the ethical frameworks provided by these indigenous place-based practices and associated forms of knowledge. Grounded normativity houses and reproduces the practices and procedures based on deep reciprocity that are inherently informed by an intimate relationship to place. Grounded normativity teaches us how to live our lives in relation to other people and non-human life forms in a profoundly non-authoritarian, non-dominating, non-exploitative manner. Grounded normativity teaches us how to be in respectful, diplomatic relationships with other indigenous and non-indigenous nations with whom we might share territorial responsibilities or common political or economic interests. Our relationship to the land itself generates the processes, practices, and knowledges that inform our political systems and through which we practice solidarity. To willfully abandon them would amount to a form of auto-genocide, and that's exactly what we're experiencing. Exactly, yes. The land we gathered on this fall for the ASA annual meeting holds the relationships that inform Anishinaabe nationhood and provides them with the political processes to engage with the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and Wendat Nation on the North Shore of Lake Ontario. It provides them with the practice and knowledge that allows them to critically interrogate capitalism, heteropatriarchy, and white supremacy. It provides them with the material culture to rebuild their political orders and conceptualization of nationhood without replicating the heteropatriarchy or anti-blackness normalized in our settler colonial reality. When we disappear Indigenous presence from our intellectual endeavors, our movement building, and our scholarship, we not only align ourselves with the wrong side of history, we necessarily negate any form of solidarity and become actors in the maintenance of settler colonialism. Given the clear stakes at play, we would like to thank David Roediger for opening up this crucial line of critical inquiry via the association's presidential address. Masi Cho Chi Miigwech. There we go. So like I said, I think that's going to be a really great introduction into understanding another book that I've been needing to read more in depth lately. But I think will especially give us like a comparative understanding, because like I said, this article was written in 2016, so obviously it goes to show that even though like this is a second wave feminist who wrote it, so like the main critique of feminism in the second wave, or really the first obviously especially, is that it usually ignores the necessity of respecting land. But I'm curious to see, because I've read other things by Griffin before, but I haven't like in-depth read this. And I'm curious to see if she mentions anything about Indigenous knowledges in it, or if she purely blames it on patriarchy, and then in itself, that's a myopic analysis. So we'll see. We'll both see. So like I said, what we're going to read next is called Women and Nature, the Roaring Inside Her. And it's from 1978. We'll read the back of the book first, as always, and then we'll get into it. So this is what the back says. Women in Nature is about memory and mutilation, female anger as power, female presence as transforming force. It embraces ritual and science, history and imagination, calling up the voices and body of our earth and restoring to us knowledge of her beauty and our own. In one of the infinite false polarities of patriarchy, both the exploiter rapists and the sexist ecology movement have lumped women and nature together in a view negative for us both. Griffin has collected here the most apparently disparate materials: lumbering manuals, gynecology texts, the pronouncements of early theologians, Annals of American Exploration, office manuals, poetry, the dreams of the scientists, etc., into an extraordinary collage which, for all the research and hard intellectual work underlying it, becomes an intense physical experience. So we'll see what we think about it. Because, like I said, she's conflating gender and sex. And that's always a losing battle. But it was written, like I said, in a time well before any of that discussion was made more common. So I'm not surprised that she did, because people still do it to this day. People being academics. Let me switch over. So I should look up the little. Here's the the subtitles as usual. Susan Griffin. Women and Nature, just so it'll be up here while I'm reading the physical copy. I liked other stuff that I've read by them. We'll just minimize this and keep it up. So for anyone, oh, I gotta switch, I forget. Gotta switch so you can see. Here we go. So that'll be up there, just so if anyone comes into the Twitch, you'll see. TikTok, it's all the same for you. But at least there's a little right up here. Alright, so like I said, I'll start with the preface, and then I'll read maybe at least the first chapter. We'll see how long it is. And then we'll get out of here. So there's a preface, and it goes like this. This is an unconventional book, and so it was felt needed some preface. How you doing, Will? I began writing this book roughly 3 years ago, after I was asked to deliver a lecture on women and ecology. I was concerned that the ecological movement had often placed the burden for solving its problems, those that this civilization has with nature, on women. I said in that lecture that women were always being asked to clean up, and to this I added the observation that men consider women to be more material than themselves, or more a part of nature. The fact that man does not consider himself a part of nature, but indeed considers himself superior to matter, seemed to me to gain significance when placed against man's attitude that woman is both inferior to him and closer to nature. Hence this book, called Woman and Nature, grew. In the process of writing, I found that I could best discover my insights about the logic of civilized man by going underneath logic. That is, by writing associatively and thus enlisting my intuition or uncivilized self. Thus, my prose in this book is like poetry, and like poetry always begins with feeling. One of the loudest complaints which this book makes about patriarchal thought or the thought of civilized man is that it claims to be objective and separated from emotion, and so it is appropriate that the style of this book does not make that separation. Since patriarchal thought does, however, represent itself as emotionless, objective, detached, and bodiless, the dicta of Western civilization and science on the subjects, I thought I was like dividing the division, okay. Subjects of women and nature in this book are written in a parody of a voice with such presumptions. This voice rarely uses a personal pronoun, never speaks as I or we, and almost always implies, TikTok, that it has found absolute truth, or at least has the authority to do so. Twinkle, be quiet. There's no laundry in there for you. You don't have any reason to go in there. In writing this book, this paternal voice became quite real to me, and I was afraid of it. It sprang out at me as the form of recognized opinion, and told me that the reactions I experienced in my female body to its declarations were ridiculous, unfounded, hysterical, biased. You will recognize that voice from its use of such phrases as, "it is decided," or "the discovery was made." Much research went into the reconstruction of this voice. I tried to preserve its style and tone accurately. The other voice in the book began as my voice, but was quickly joined by the voices of other women and voices from nature, with which I felt more and more strongly identified, particularly as I read the opinions of men about us. Again, you see she's already setting up like a very binary concept, and one that, like, if not properly contextualized within colonialism, can very easily, like, attempt to excuse especially white women that are assigned female at birth from the overall context of colonization, in which, of course, many of the white women during especially time of enslavement in the US are equally, if not differently, but equally as responsible for creating violence of. The other voice in the book, wait, I just read that. These two voices, though you will find more than two in the text, are set in different types of styles, thus a dialogue is implied throughout the book. I begin the book by tracing a history of patriarchy's judgments about the nature of matter or the nature of nature, and place these judgments side by side, chronologically, with men's opinions about the nature of women throughout history. From this philosophical beginning, the book becomes more actual, treating of the effect of patriarchal logic on material beings. And so the first book, Matter, continues the analogy drawn between women and nature into explorations of the earth, trees, cows, show horses, and women's bodies as we all exist in patriarchy. The second book is entitled Separation, and beginning with the separation of a womb from a woman's body. Again, you see the equation of gender and sex, which of course we know is not correct. Bliss and protests against all of these separations, which are part of the civilized male's thinking and living, mind from emotion, body from soul, and reveals that separation which patriarchy requires us to make from ourselves. The third book, called Passage, finally separates our consciousness from the consciousness of patriarchy, and thus the fourth book is called Her Vision. Now she sees through her own eyes. In her vision, all that we have seen in the first two books from the eye of patriarchy is now re-seen. Thus the book is not so much utopian as a description of a different way of seeing, and so the section called the Zoological Garden is reflected in her vision as the lion in the den of the prophets. I had thought in writing Her Vision that this book would be like a mirror, and hence tried to put the sections in the same order except backward, as they appeared in the first two books. But this proved impossible. Her vision. Oh my god, it's so loud. Thanks for the follow. That's my own fault, not yours. While I was writing, her vision would not be so constricted. While I was writing Women in Nature, the roaring inside her, the spaces I created within it began to be real for me. Passing over into work on Her Vision, I would feel as if I had entered a free zone and breathe a sigh of relief. I hope the reader will enter these spaces as I entered them, moving through these ways of seeing with passion, and will hear the voices as I hear them, especially the great chorus of Women in Nature, which will swell with time. And I hope the reader will know too, though this is just a book and though thus just a fiction, that the feelings which enter these words are very real, and that in this matter of women in nature we have cause to feel deeply. Susan Griffin, November 1977. So that's the same decade that neoliberalism started. Let me give Twinkle some treats, or else I feel like she's gonna just keep meowing like that, and I'm already, like, audio overstimulated, so that's gonna make me literally rip my whole fucking head out, like, hair out of my head. So hold on. Let me do that so she'll stop. And then I'll be right back. All right, so here's a prologue. It goes like this. He says that woman speaks with nature, that she hears voices from under the earth, that wind blows in her ears and trees whisper to her. The dead sing through her mouth, and the cries of infants are clear to her. But for him this dialogue is over. He says he is not part of this world, that he was set on this world as a stranger. He sets himself apart from women and nature. And so it is Goldilocks who goes to the home of the three bears, Little Red Riding Hood who converses with the wolf, Dorothy who befriends a lion, Snow White who talks to the birds, Cinderella with mice as her allies, the mermaid who is half fish, Thumbelina courted by a mole. And when we hear in the Navajo chant of the mountain that a grown man sits and smokes with bears and follows directions given to him by squirrels, we are surprised. We had thought only little girls spoke with animals. We are the bird's eggs. Birds, eggs, flowers, butterflies, rabbits, cows, sheep. We are caterpillars. We are leaves of ivy and sprigs of wallflower. We are women. We rise from the wave. We are gazelle and doe, elephant and whale, lilies and roses, and peach. We are air. We are flame. We are oyster and pearl. We are girls. We are woman and nature. And he says he cannot hear us speak, but we hear. Book 1. Matter. How man regards and makes use of woman and nature. Again, I don't agree with her conflation of woman and female. And I don't agree with the binary of gender and biological sex. And I also, if she goes on to ignore and conflate the experience of gender as if it is like all the same for every person of the same ethnicity or of different, as if the gender experience is homogenous, when of course we know it isn't, because it's racialized and gendered and in different cultures differently. I will say something when I notice. Anyway, matter. It is decided that matter is transition I don't know why I can't say this word. Transitory and illusory, like the shadows on a wall cast by firelight. That we dwell in the cave of our flesh, which is also matter, also illusory. It is decided that what is real is outside the cave, in a light brighter than we can imagine, that matter traps us in darkness. The idea of matter existed before matter and is more perfect, ideal. Sic transit, how quickly passed, gloria mundi, the glories of this world, it is said. Matter is transitory and illusory, it is said. This world is an allegory for the next. The moon is an image of the church, which reflects divine light. The wind is an image of the spirit. The sapphire reassembles the number 11, which has transgressed 10, the number of the commandments. Therefore, the number 11 stands for sin. It is decided that matter is passive and inert, and that all motion originates from outside matter. That the soul is the cause of all movement in matter, and that the soul was created by God. That all other movement proceeds from violent contact with other moving matter, which was first moved by God. That the spheres in perpetual movement are moved by the winds of heaven, which are moved by God, that all movement proceeds from God. The matter is only a potential for form or a potential for movement. It is decided that the nature of woman is passive, that she is a vessel waiting to be filled. It is decided that the existence of God can be proved by reason that the reason exists to apprehend God and nature. God is unchangeable, it is said. Logos is a quality of God, created in man by God, and it is eternal. The soul existed before the body and will live after it. And I do not know how long anything I touch by a bodily sense will exist. The words of a saint read, as, for instance, this sky and this land, and whatever other bodies I perceive in them. But 7 and 3 are 10, and not only now, but always. Therefore, this incorruptible truth of numbers is common to me and anyone at all who reasons. And it is stated elsewhere that Genesis cannot be understood without a mastery of mathematics. He who does not know mathematics cannot know any of the other sciences. It is said again, and it is decided that all truth can be found in mathematics, that the true explanation is mathematics, and fact merely evidence. There are 3 degrees of abstraction, each leading to higher truths. The scientist peels away uniqueness, revealing category. The mathematician peels away sensual fact, revealing number. The metaphysician peels away even number and reveals the fruit of pure being. It is put forward that science might be able to prolong life for longer periods than might be accomplished by nature, and it is predicted that machines for navigation can be made without rowers, so that the largest ships on rivers or seas will by a single man be propelled with greater velocity than if they were full of men, that cars can be made to move without the aid of animals at an unbelievable rapidity, that flying machines can be constructed, that such things can be made without limit. It is decided that vision takes place because of a ray of light emanating from the eye to the thing perceived. It is decided that God is primordial light, shining in the darkness of first matter, giving it substantial being. It is decided that geometrical optics holds the key to all understanding. It is said that the waters of the firmament separate the corporeal from the spiritual creation, that the space above is infinite, indivisible, immutable, and is the immensity of God, that the earth is a central sphere surrounded by concentric zones, perfect circles of air, ether, and fire, containing the stars, the sun, and the planets, all kept in motion by the winds of heaven. That heaven is beyond the zone of fire, and that hell is within the sphere of the earth. That hell is beneath our feet. It is stated that all bodies have a natural place, the heaven bodies tending toward the earth, the lighter toward the heavens. And what is sublunary is decaying and corruptible. The earth is so depraved and broken in all kinds of vice and abominations that it seemeth to be a place that hath received all the filthiness and purgings of all other worlds and ages, it is said. And the air below the moon is thick and dirty, while the air above shineth night and day, of resplendor perpetual, it is said. And it is decided that the angels live above the moon and aid God in the movement of celestial spheres. The good angels, it is said, hold cheap all the knowledge of material and temporal matters which inflates the demon with pride. And the demon resides in the earth. It is decided, in hell, under our feet. It is observed that women are closer to the earth. I'm loving this so far. I hope y'all are too. I think that it's different than what I expected it to be. And I think that I'm loving it for that. That women lead to man's corruption. Women are the devil's gateway, it is said. That regarding the understanding of spiritual things, women have a different nature than men. It is observed and it is stated that women are intellectually like children, that women are feebler of body and mind than men. It is said, frailty, thy name is woman. And it is stated that the word woman is used to mean the lust of the flesh. That men are moved to carnal lust when they hear or see woman, whose face is a burning wind, whose voice is a hissing serpent. It is decided that in birth the female provides the matter, the menstruum, the yolk, and that the male provides the form, which is a material, and that out of this union is born the embryo. It is written in the scripture that out of Adam, who was the first man, was taken Eve, and because she was born of man, he also named her, she shall be called woman. And it is written in the bestiary that the cubs of the lioness are born dead, but on the third day the lion breathes between their eyes, and they wake to life. It is decided that vital heat is the source of all vital activity, that this heat emanates from God to the male of the species, and that this vital heat informs the form of the species with maleness, whereas the female is too cold to effect this change. It is decided also that all monstrosities of birth come from a defect in the matter provided by the female, which resists the male effort to determine form. It is decided that vital heat is included in semen, that it is the natural principle in the spirit, and is I can never say this word, I don't know why, analogous to that element in the stars. It is decided that the vital heat of the sun causes spontaneous generation. The discovery is made that the sun and not the earth is the center of the universe, and the one who discovers this writes, "It is the middle of all sits sun enthroned, or in the middle of all sits sun enthroned." In this most beautiful temple, could we place this luminary in any better position from which he can illuminate the whole at once? He is rightly called the lamp, the mind, the ruler of the universe. Hermes Trismegistus names him the invisible god. Sophocles Electra calls him the all-seeing. So the sun sits as upon a royal throne, ruling his children, the plants, which circle round him. Meanwhile, the earth conceives by the sun and becomes pregnant with an annual rebirth. And it is decided that the sun is Father the God, the stars God the Son, and the ethereal medium the Holy Ghost. Mutability on the earth, it is said, came to the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Eden, after the fall. That before the fall there was immortal bliss on earth, but that after the fall all things decay in time, and to their end do draw. That the face of the earth is a record of man's sin, that the height of mountains, the depth of valleys, the sites of great boulders, craters, seas, bodies of land, lakes, and rivers, the shapes of rocks, cliffs, all were formed by the deluge, which was God's punishment for sin. Alex, this is Susan Griffin's book, Women and Nature. So basically, the whole first book, if you want to check out the beginning where I describe exactly what I'm reading right now, check that out once it's posted. I will post it later today. But she goes through and she basically recounts the early stories of how a colonial history was built, and through like a allegedly objective and authoritative voice about a creation story. So she's repeating all of the myths of that. And then eventually in later she does secondly, I forget what she talks about in her second book, but eventually in the third and fourth she critiques the first two. But to do that you have to see how the first and the second were created to build on each other and were treated as if they were fact. So that's what we're talking about. Yeah. I thank you. Yeah, I would never ever do what you thought before. The world is the devil, and the devil is the world, it is said. And of the fact that women are the devil's gateway, it is observed that sin and afterwards death came into the world because Eve consorted with the devil in the body of a serpent. See, like, and I was saying this earlier, like way earlier, but obviously I don't agree with cis heteronormativity, so I don't believe in a conflation of gender and biological sex. And I don't believe in it because I know it's made up. I don't believe in it because I know it's nonsense. It's just as nonsense as the creation story is in something that disregards the many civilizations that existed before it. So anyway, I think that it's an important thing, though, for her to read it like this, because the creation of the binary is just as made up and frivolous as any of the rest. So even the conflation and her pointing it out in the original text is as important as her pointing out the absurdity of any of the rest of it. That the power of the devil lies in the privy parts of men. That women act as the devil's agent and use flesh as bait. That women under the power of the devil meet with him secretly in the woods, in the wilderness, at night. That they kiss him on the anus. That is literally a sentence she wrote. That they offer him pitch black candles, which he lights with a fart. Have I never read the Bible? Is this a real thing? Can someone confirm? That they anoint themselves with his urine. That they dance back to back together and feast on food that would nauseate the most ravenously hungry stomach. That a mass is held with a naked woman's body as an altar, feces, urine, and menstrual blood upon her ass. That the devil copulates with all the women in this orgy, in this ritual. That these women are witches. That Lucifer, before his fall as an archangel, was a clear body composed of the purest and brightest air, but that after his fall he was veiled with a grosser substance, and took a new form of dark and thick air. Yeah, exactly, yeah. That virgin's urine is quite unclouded, bright and thin, and almost lemon color. Whereas the urine of the woman who has lost her virginity is very muddy and never bright or clear. And that though it is written that there is no wickedness to compare to the wickedness of a woman, it is also written that good women have brought beatitude to men, saved nations, lands, and cities. Right? That's what I was thinking, yeah. And that blessed is the man who has a virtuous wife, for the number of his days shall be doubled. And that a virtuous wife is one who obeys her husband as the church obeys Christ. And it is said that there are certain woods which exist free from the penalty of Adam, where there are tongues in trees, books in running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. It is now discovered that celestial substance, like the substance of the earth, is mutable. That's exactly what I was thinking. There's no doubt that that's exactly what it was. And it is decided that although the celestial substance is mutable, yet immutable laws govern all mutability, and that the invariability of God's will can be deduced from the perfection of his laws, which rule the natural world. It is posited that the spaces between the planetary orbits each correspond to Euclid's 5 perfect solids, that from Saturn to Mercury each corresponds to a cube, a tetrahedron, I can never say that word, dodecahedron, an icosahedron. I never heard that one ever. and an octahedron. For this reason, it is said that there are only 6 planets, and that there could be only 6 planets, no more and no less. Oh, yeah, for sure. I know, yeah. It is announced that the music of the spheres may be discovered through mathematical laws. That the cause of the universe, it is said, lies in mathematical harmony, which exists in the mind of the Creator. It is said that all shapes, celestial and terrestrial, are in reality geometrical shapes. A compass is devised and a set of rules drawn for reducing the irregular to the regular and for simplifying a combination of regular shapes to a single figure. It is argued that the heliocentric system, which, since it requires only 34 epicycles as opposed to the 80 required by the geocentric system, is more simple and that therefore it must be true. It is said, nature doth not that by many things which can be done by a few, that nature is not redundant, that nature is pleased with simplicity and affects not the pomp of superfluous causes. Vain pomp and glory of this world, I hate ye, it is said. And extravagance and excess are seen to be apparent in women. Women have the defect of inordinate affections and passions. It is written, and women's sorrows are either too extreme or not to be believed. It is said, and women being moved to anger are more envious than a serpent, more malicious than a tyrant, more deceitful than the devil. And of woman's wrath it is said they are made of blood. And of woman's mind it is said that it shifts oft like the inconstant wind, and it is said that all witchcraft comes from carnal lust, which is in women insatiable. And it is said that all sin originated in the flesh of the body of a woman and lives in her body. And the old text reads that Christ was born of a virgin in order that the disobedience caused by the serpent might be destroyed in the same manner in which it had originated. And we are reminded that we have brought death into the world. Those pesky women. They can't get with the maths. They won't do the maths. Now it is disputed, and then it is made clear that angels do not possess bodies, but only assume them. That they do not occupy any point in space, but are virtually present and operating at that point. And from this, some suppose that angels are thin. And it is wondered how thin angels are, and how many angels could occupy at one time the space on the head of a pin. That's exactly what I thought of first, and I was surprised that it even took a split second for them to say that. And it is said that nature can be understood only by reduction, that only by reducing her to numbers does she become clear. That without mathematics, one wanders in vain through a dark labyrinth. It is decided that that which cannot be measured and reduced to numbers is not real. That's exactly how scientists feel to this day. It is questioned whether or not motion is real. It is discovered that motion can be measured by measuring the space through which movement moves and the time in which the moving takes place. It is decided that motion is real. But it is said again that all motion came originally from God and that God has given the universe a fixed quantity of movement. It is decided that all motion results from bodies acting directly on other bodies, that one body cannot affect another at a distance. And it is stated that all matter is made up of smaller particles of matter whose motions determine the appearance of the universe. That God alone sees things as they are, that he sees the particles directly. That if anyone were to know the position of all the particles at any given time, he could predict the future. It is said that the sensation of color is produced by the action of these particles on the retina of the eye. The particles are real, but that the sensation they produce is not. That color is not real. Odor is not real. Dreams not real. Pleasure and pain not real. Nor nightmares. Nor chamber music. And of the difference of women from men, it is said that women are more sensual than they. It is said that women exist for pleasure. How fair and pleasant art thou, O love, for thy delights, it is written. The human mind, it is written, was made by God to understand not whatever you please, but quantity. For what is there in the human mind besides figures and magnitudes, it is asked. And it is seen that the senses are deceptive, and the ancient texts reveal that of understanding there are two kinds, one authentic and the other bastard, and sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch are all bastard understandings. It is said that women are the fountain, the flood, and the very root of deception, falsity, and lies. I'm sure she'll get into that a lot in chapters 3 and 4. Woman, for instance, was formed from a defective rib of man's breast, it is said, which was bent contrary to him, and so therefore it is in woman's nature to deceive. It is advised that if one would follow a woman to her dressing room, one might discover the truth. Beneath her paint, her wigs, her jewels, her robes, is a monstrous creature so odious and ugly that one finds there serpents rather than saints. It is ascertained that sensations are confused thoughts, and the imagination and memory, because they derive from sensation, should be distrusted. The word hysterical is taken from the word hyster, meaning womb, because it is observed that the woman is the seat of the emotions, and women are more emotional than men. That crying is womanish. It is observed, and that dramatic poetry, since it causes crying, ought to be avoided, that it has a most formidable power of corrupting even men of high character. It is written that women have the defect of inordinate affections and passions, and over lively imaginations, and for this reason young girls should not be taught Italian and Spanish, since books written in both those languages have a dangerous effect on women. And it is cautioned that husbands should not counsel with their wives, nor allow them to see their accounting books. Those who, moving others, are themselves as stone, unmoved, cold, and to temptation slow, they rightly do inherit heaven's graces, and husband nature's riches from expense. It is written, and it is also written that woman is not fully the master of herself, and that only one woman in thousands has been endowed with the God-given aptitude to live in chastity and virginity. Yeah, it's all exactly that, yeah. And the old texts read that where there is death, there too is sexual coupling, and where there is no death, there is no sexual coupling either. And it is decided that God does not die. It is decided that God is the maker, but that he has no hands. It is decided that he created harmony and beauty, but that he has no ears nor eyes. That he is not corporeal, nor he is matter, but he is ultimate reality, that he exists absolutely and infinitely, that he is dependent on no other being, that he was not born, that he has no mother, he is the Father, he will not die. Sounds like a fucking beast. It is said that God is a mathematician, that the human mind understands some propositions in geometry and arithmetic, but that in these the divine wisdom knows infinitely more propositions because it knows them all. That God has allowed us to see by creating us after his own image, so that we could share in his own thoughts. Cogito, I think, ergo, therefore sum I am, it is said. And it is written that not the woman but the man is the image of God, and that the image of God is in man, and it is one. That women were drawn from man, who has God's jurisdiction as if he were God's vicar, because he has the image of the one God. That as God is the principle of the universe, so is man, in likeness to God, the principle of the human race. It is decided that the minds of women are defective, that the fibers of the brain are weak, that because women menstruate regularly, the supply of blood to the brain is weakened. All abstract knowledge, all knowledge which is dry, it is cautioned, must be abandoned to the laborious and solid mind of man. For this reason, it is further reasoned, women will never learn geometry. There is a controversy over whether or not women should be taught arithmetic. To a woman who owns a telescope, it is suggested that she rid herself of it, that she stop trying to find out what's happening on the moon. It is decided that matter cannot know matter. That matter is but a brute thing and only capable of local motion. That matter has no intellect and no perception. It is stated that nature should be approached only through reason. 1382. Thomas Brouardin, in Treatise on the Proportions of Velocities in Moving Bodies, proposes a mathematical law of dynamics universally valid for all changes in velocity. 1431. Joan of Arc, age 22, placed high on the fire so the flames would reach her slowly, dies. She is asked why she wears male costume. Thank you, I would appreciate that. Pick me up a Kit Kat. I'm not sponsored by Kit Kat. on either TikTok or on Twitch. And I also don't even eat dairy, so this is all a joke. Everything is made up. 1468, the Pope defines witchcraft as crimen exceptum, removing all legal limit to torture. 1482, Leonardo da Vinci, the Leonardo's brother that was a finch instead of a human, moves to Milan and begins his notebooks on hydraulics, mechanics, anatomy. He paints Madonna of the Rocks. Does she see the body of St. Michael? They ask her. Did he come to her naked? 1523, 1,000 witches burn in a single year in the Diocese of Como. 1543, Vesalius publishes De Humani Corpus Fabrica. 1543, again. Copernicus publishes De Revolutionibus Orbum Palestrium. She is asked if she is in the state of grace. She is asked if St. Margaret speaks English. 1571, Johannes Kepler born. 1572, Augustus the Pious issues Consultationes Saxionica, stating that a good witch must be burned because she has made a pact with the devil. She confesses that she falsely pretended to have revelations from God and his angels from St. Catherine and St. Margaret. 1585, witch burnings in 2 villages leave 1 female inhabitant each. 1589, Francis Bacon is made clerk of the Star Chamber. He says that nature herself must be examined. 1581 to 1591, 900 burned in Lorraine. That nature must be bound in service, he persuades. 1600, Gilbert's de Magnet published. 1603, William Harvey insists at the examination of the witches. 1609, Galileo, on hearing a rumor of the invention of a glass magnifying distant objects, constructs a telescope. It is urged that nature must be hounded in her wanderings before one can lead her and drive her. 1609, again, Kepler publishes Astronoma Nova. Another 1609. The whole population of Nevers is declared witches. He says that the earth should be put on the rack and tortured for her secrets. 1615, William Harvey lectures on the circulation of the blood at the Royal College of Physicians. You never know, he might have. 1619, Kepler publishes his third law, De Harmonic Mundi. Another 1619, the first black slaves are introduced in America. She is asked if she signed the devil's book. She is asked if the devil had a body. She is asked whom she chose to be an incubus. 1622, Francis Bacon publishes Natural and Experimental History for the Foundation of Philosophy. 1622 to 1623, Johanna George II, Prince Bishop, builds a house for the trying of witches at Bamberg, where 600 burn. 1628, 158 burned at Wurzburg. 1637, Descartes publishes De Corps de la Méthode. She is asked what oath she made, what fingers she was forced to raise, where she made a union with her incubus, what food she ate at the Sabbath, what music was played, what dances were danced, what devil's marks were on her body, who were the children on whom she cast spells, what animals she bewitched, how she was able to fly through the air. 1638, Galileo publishes 2 new sciences. Wow. That was double the science. 1640, carbon dioxide obtained by Helmont. 1644, Descartes publishes Principia Philosophiae. 1670, Brunnen witch trials. 1687, Newton publishes Principia. She confesses that every Monday the devil lay with her for fornication. She confesses that when he copulated with her, she felt intense pain. She confesses that after having intercourse with the devil, she married her daughter to him. 1666, Newton procures a triangular glass prism to try the celebrated phenomena of colors. 1704, Newton publishes Optics. 1717, Halley reveals that the world is adrift in a star swirl. 1738, Dean of Faculty of Law at Rostock demands that witches be extirpated by fire and sword. 1745, witch trial at Lyons, 5 sentenced to death. 1749, Sister Maria Renata executed and burned. 1775, Anna Maria Schlegel executed for witchcraft. She confesses she passed through the keyhole of a door, that she became a cat and then a horse. She confesses she made a pact with the devil, that she asked for the devil's help. We confess we were carried through the air in a moment. And it is stated that the rational soul, which is immaterial, bears the image of its divine maker, has will, is endowed with intellect, and is more noble and more valuable of being than the whole corporeal world, that Adam is soul and Eve is flesh. It is argued now that animals do not think, that animals move automatically like machines. That's literally what Descartes believed, by the way. Which is like, you fucking fool. That passion in animals is more violent because it is not accompanied by thought. That our own bodies are distinguished from machines only by a mind which thinks without reference to any passion. And it is further argued that if animals could think, they might have immortal souls. But it becomes obvious that animals do not have immortal souls and cannot think, since if one animal had an immortal soul, all might.